Oh, God.
All right, good. So welcome everybody. Here we are. We're going to start on 16b4. 16b4. And we started reading this, but we're going to start it from the top again. This is, again, there's a confluence between what we've been studying in the morning sessions in Pirkei Avot. The importance of Torah study. Very, very big theme in rabbinic tradition. And here we have this hyperbolic declaration. We already had one of them, that studying Torah is more important than building the Beis HaMikdash, than building the temple. So we did that already. And now we're going to go to another very, sweeping statement. And then, but this one will unpack it a little bit. So we're at the last paragraph pretty much on 16b4, the right-hand side, where it says the Gemara cites another statement regarding the importance of Torah study. Does somebody see that? Who's going to read it for us? Going once. Going twice. Rabbi said in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marsa.
I'll read.
Thank you. I love that enthusiasm.
Well, I might pronounce the names wrong. So that's the only reason that I love.
I read the names. You can skip the names. Go straight for the jugular.
All right. The Gemara cites another statement regarding the importance of Torah study. Rabbi said in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marsa.
Perfect.
Thank you. The study of Torah is greater than honoring one's father and mother. Since for all the years Jacob spent in the academy of Ever, he was not punished, even though during that time he failed to honor his parents.
Okay, so we touched on this last time, but now we're going to dig in a little bit. So if we look at the 10 Commandments, the 10 Commandments have all kinds of commandments. They have 10 of them, actually, if not more. And Shabbat is there, accepting God and not betraying God is there. Then there's a whole bunch of interpersonal things about not mistreating human beings, of course, not killing them. And there's the mitzvah of treating your parents with respect and dignity. Is there in the 10 Commandments the mitzvah of studying Torah? No. So you would think that that's a pretty significant message that the Torah gives. Here's the 10 big ones. This is God's, initial communication to the entire people. And this is the choice that God makes, of what to mention and what not to mention. And now the rabbis come along and say, we don't care that Torah study is not mentioned in the 10 Commandments. And actually, it's really not mentioned at all in the Torah in any kind of clearly explicit way. We're told to teach words of Torah to our children, but it doesn't tell us study Torah day and night. The main verse that we use for that actually comes from the book from the beginning of the book of Joshua. So, nevertheless, the rabbi said there's no question about it. Studying Torah is even more important than dealing with your parents in a respectful way. So that's an eyebrow raiser, right? This is meant to be an eyebrow raiser. Of course, it's meant to be a provocative, shocking kind of statement. They know what they're doing. Of course, there's, tremendous amount of discussion in the rabbinic literature, in the Talmud and so on, about how super, super important treating your parents right is. There's no intention here to say, it's really a secondary kind of thing. Nevertheless, they want to use, because everybody recognizes how super important it is to do that, they use that to elevate the study of Torah to this highest level. Okay, how do they work it out? So now they say, let's look at the biblical text itself. And with the biblical, well, I use that word in a very, broad way, because the story that they tell is not anywhere in the Torah either. But they say, Jacob spent years at the Academy of Aver, the Academy actually of Shem and Aver. He studied Torah in a yeshiva for years and years, and he was away from home. He wasn't taking care of his parents at all of that time. And nevertheless, that wasn't counted against him. That's the basic picture that they give here. Now, of course, it's, this is a legend. This is a midrash. This is not in the Torah itself. And it's a kind of a projection into the lives of the biblical characters of a kind of an ideal practice that they experienced in their own lives. We know again and again that people went away from home to study in, look, we have it today, but in the Jewish community, this was very much more prevalent than in the neighboring societies. And you went away from home to find a rabbi, to find a master, to find a mentor who would teach you Torah. And that meant, family dislocation. It meant, breaking up family bonds between parents and children and between spouses. And of course, back then it was the men that studied and not the women. So men would abandon their wives. One of the very, it's a very rich and beautiful and touching and complicated story, Rabbi Akiva and his wife. It's one of the romantic stories in the Talmud. Their love for each other is celebrated in a super, in a romantic way, which is not usual. And nevertheless, Rabbi Akiva, at his wife's insistence, leaves home because he was never educated as a child, and she pushes him out of the house, and she says, I only married you because I believe in your potential. You need to become a great rabbi. Get out of here. So so that was on an adult level. But for younger people, this was a phenomenon as well. And of course, it happened throughout Jewish history. So till this very day, till this very moment, to study Torah was considered very, very crucial, and parents sacrificed tremendously and emotionally as well to send their kids away to boarding school, so to speak, because they felt that they needed to have their kid be connected to the Torah. So this is now what they're picturing, is that happened with Jacob. Now, again, just to point out the obvious anachronism, the Torah hasn't been given yet. There is no such thing as the yeshivas. There is no such thing as rabbinic Judaism and so on, but that doesn't matter. The rabbis put it back on to Jacob, just like, for instance, when we have wonderful, amazing paintings. I mean, there's plenty of crummy ones too, but wonderful, amazing paintings in churches of donors sitting on the side of the panels of the painting of, let's say, a crucifixion or something. So they're put back into that reality, and everybody's dressed according to the contemporary style. So the idea of bridging the periods of time, the biblical period of time, becomes real within the practices of the community. So yeah, Jen, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was wondering to what extent we were hand waving the anachronism, but I guess also it's no different than modern dress productions of Shakespeare or whatever. It's the same kind of idea, so it all works.
Well, yeah, right. When you're updating the story, so to speak, right? When you make Hamlet into NATO general or something like that, right? It's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's the same kind of thing. But it is a little different. It's like, I guess, more like having a clock in Julius Caesar as opposed to a sundial. But they don't really actually, they feel they can hand wave this. They don't feel like they have to explain, oh, well, this is how the Torah was accessible before Moses or anything like that.
So what do you mean? What's the phrase hand wave? I don't know what that means.
It means we're not going to talk about this. We're just going to say he went to yeshiva, and we're going to ignore the fact that that's a glaring anachronism and just accept it and move on with our lives. And that's like totally
right.
acceptable.
Was,
So they don't make up a way to say, well, back then the way you access the Torah, which was eternal, was such and such and such.
No, it's automatic. It's ubiquitous. It's totally accepted all over rabbinic, literature and culture to do that kind of anachronism. Yeah.
But don't you, Rabbi?
Yes, Sylvia.
Don't you think it's also sort of a definition of the importance of education? Education in this world, I guess, largely meant Torah study.
Yeah, for sure. I think that you're putting a little bit, you're being anachronistic the other way.
Perhaps.
When we talk, we certainly in the United States and in the West, I suppose, the Jews are notorious for valuing education.
Right.
But that actually is a secularization of what the rabbis were interested in. The rabbis were not interested in education as education. Oh, good, you'll become a lawyer, you'll become a doctor, you'll become a physicist, you'll become a journalist, no, they're interested in Torah. And they're interested in studying Torah and learning Torah, and therefore everybody had to be literate and had to know how to read the alphabet and so on and so forth. But they did not. They privileged one very, very important enterprise, which they felt was divine and above and beyond anything else. Now it spilled over into other things. It spilled over into other kinds of enterprises because they also believed that studying Torah encompassed everything. So for instance, you needed to know mathematics, you needed to know astronomy, you needed to know medicine, you needed to know all those things to apply it to topics within the Torah that were commanded by God. But the standard was not education. The standard was Torah. What we did in our modern evolution, as we walked away from religion per se, still had such a huge cultural investment in people should have a book and people should be studying, and we're not all that interested in being jocks. We're interested in being intellectuals, that it then transferred over into the kind of concepts that we are comfortable with today. But education meant for the rabbis, Torah education. And the difference, of course, we see to this very day in the ultra-Orthodox community, where they won't give their kids a decent secular education. It's a travesty and it's a tragedy. But their idea is we're just being so loyal to the idea it's Torah and nothing else.
But that's their interpretation in the modern world. But couldn't one say that the study of Torah was the basis upon which everything else then could be done?
Right, but it was a basis. Now we don't even have that as the basis.
I understand.
The judgment of saying education is important.
Now we have.
God forbid. It's a capitalistic concept of, God forbid my kid should not grow up to be a white collar worker. It's a whole different kind of concept. Their concept was, about sacred learning. They were fine with being shoemakers and with being blacksmiths and with being sanitation workers, as long as you study Torah. All right, so let's look at the note at 64.
64. Okay. In some places, the yeshiva is called the Academy of Shem and Aver. However, when Jacob went to study Torah there, the Shem had already died. Thus, the Gemara refers to it simply as the Academy of Aver.
Okay, who's Shem? Who is Shem?
The guy that's related to Abednego.
Shem is, yeah, go ahead.
The son of Noah.
Right. Shem is one of the three sons of Noah. And that's where we get the name Semite from. We are descended from Shem. So this is the rabbi's historical, picture that Jacob, who lived even by biblical accounting, he lived. Abraham was 10 generations after Noah. So Shem, so he was 9 generations after Shem. So Jacob is 2 generations after Abraham. So that makes him 11 generations after Shem. Nevertheless, Shem is almost still alive. Aver is alive. He just died, right? 11 generations later, Shem, no longer is giving Torah classes in his. Okay, so again, part of the sense of time and history that's at play here. So anyway, but he goes there because it's a famous yeshiva. It's the place where God's word is being taught. And why does he go there and when does he go there? So let's look at 65.
After Jacob received the blessing from his father Isaac, he was forced to flee to Haran. Haran. However, he did not go there directly, but first spent 14 years studying at the Academy of Aver. When Jacob was separated from his son Joseph for 22 years as a punishment for not honoring his father, he was not punished for the 14 years spent studying Torah.
So that's what we're going to get into now. We're going to start getting into dividing up into periods the life of the patriarch Jacob. And what we have here is a midrashic story that when Jacob ran away because Esau wanted to kill him, the normal reading of the Torah says he runs away and he desperately, gets to Lavan's house. He has the exhausted station in the middle where he dreams of the ladder, but basically he's hightailing it out of there and he finally can get to safety at Lavan's house. Not so according to the legends of the rabbis. According to the legends of the rabbis, there's years that follow before we get into that story. And he actually goes from his parents' home when he runs away from his brother. He goes to study Torah and he's there for 14 years. And we will see, as the Gemara keeps on working it out, those 14 years are counted for him as a grace period and are not considered that, look at that, he's not taking care of his parents. He's AWOL and as a child of his parents. Let's go see how this works out.
Okay.
Gemara now offers.
Okay. Can I say something?
Sure.
Yeah. So first of all, I can think of a simpler reason why studying Torah is more important than parents, because honoring your parents, because if you don't study the Torah, you're not even going to know about that other stuff.
So that's a good point. But actually the rabbis admitted that it's not true.
Okay.
Because this is there is a long and really beautiful couple of pages in the Talmud which just drills down into this whole question and the dimensions of what does it mean to treat your parents well, and with a lot of lamenting that it's actually an impossible mitzvah to do properly. But one of the things that they say there is, do we have any like beautiful examples that we could learn from, that we can be inspired by, of people who treated their parents well? Now, as I've said many times, and just to reiterate, the Torah never tells you love your parents. It just tells you to treat them with respect and dignity and take care of them. That's what it says. It doesn't say that you have to be full of love for them or anything like that. That's up, that's whatever the relationship is, the history, the baggage, all of that. You just have to deal with that, but you deal with that with understanding that you have an imperative, a divine, sacred responsibility to relate to your parents with respect. So the Gemara says, where can we find people? It's so hard to do. The Gemara, not 21st century people who have so much trouble with different ways of life and different values and so on. Back then, right? 1,500 years ago and more, 2,000 years ago. The Gemara says, it's so hard to do. Is there anybody out there that we could point to who was amazing in the way that they treated their parents? And their answer is, yeah, there's this non-Jewish guy, Dama ben Netina, who is the model of how to treat your parents beautifully. And they say he's the person we need to learn from. So they're explicitly telling us that you don't have to study Torah. It's either you get it or you don't get it. Either you have this, as a sensitivity, as a sense of connection and decency, or you don't. And obviously studying the Torah should help you, and it should overcome whatever difficulties you may be feeling or encountering, and it should give you some guidance about how to deal with a difficult situation. But here was a guy who was just naturally, he knew what was right and what wasn't. And I'll tell you one of the stories that the Talmud says a bunch of stories about this guy. So one of the stories was that yesterday we read for Shabbat Parah. We read the Torah reading of the Parah Adumah, the red heifer. The red heifer is the red cow that we need to burn up into ashes, and then we mix the ashes with a recipe of some vegetation and water and bird stuff and the whole thing, and then with somebody comes in contact with a dead person, let's say if there's a death in the family, how are you going to be able to go to the temple? You've become ritually impure. So the Torah says, here's how you get purified. You take this red heifer mixture and you sprinkle it on the person, and then you wait a week, and then you sprinkle it again, and then they're pure. Okay, so, and that was important because now Pesach is coming up, and we have to be able to go to the temple so that we can celebrate Passover. That's why we read it 3 weeks before Passover. We read it the Shabbat before the month of Nisan begins. So, it's at least 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks before. Okay. So we got the red heifer. So the red heifer, now a red heifer, the rabbi's standards for what counts as a red heifer were actually very, very hard to meet. So a red heifer was a rarity that meant that they were very expensive. So the rabbis at one point, according to the story in the Talmud, needed a new red heifer. The mixture of the previous red heifer had been used up or was getting low, and they needed to find another red heifer to, I'm actually flipping around the story. What can I tell you? But I ruined the punchline. I'll tell you, the story was the opposite. The story was the rabbis were looking for a jewel for the breastplate of the high priest that needed to be replaced. And Dama ben Netina, Dama the son of Netina, his father Netina was a jeweler. And they heard that Netina had the perfect jewel that would be the right one to be set into the breastplate of the high priest. So they come knocking on the door, and Dama, the son, answers the door, and here's this delegation of sages they need this jewel, and they say, we want to talk to your father because we have it's a once in a lifetime deal. We're willing to pay a lot of money for the jewel. Can we talk to your father? And Dama ben Netina says, I'm sorry, my father is taking his afternoon nap, and I cannot waken my father to bother him to do business. He doesn't do business, from 1 to 3, siesta time. That's when he takes his nap. So the rabbis leave, and they go and they find it from somebody else. And as a result, Natina lost millions of dollars. So the rabbis say, what an amazing dedication. They don't say, what a jerk. They don't say, boy, he just blew the deal of the century. Doesn't he understand what's right and what's wrong? They said the opposite. They said, look at how he honored his parents. Look at how he honored his father there in the simplest, most basic way. That's more important. When my father works hard all day long and he needs to take a nap, I'm not bothering him. Come back later if you want to come back later. His welfare comes first. So he didn't touch this whole thing. He didn't bother his parent. So the rabbis say, look at that. Now, what they then say is, so therefore God gave Dama and Natina a reward. And a little later, their sages came and they needed a red heifer. And it just so happens that Natina had a red heifer. So whatever the money they lost because they weren't able to make the deal with the jewel, they made it up twice over because they were able to sell the red heifer to the sages. So God looked after them and rewarded his honoring of his parents. All of this is a very long discourse. To go back to your very important point, where the rabbis actually understand that there are limits to what Torah can accomplish and what Torah is doing. And they say this is basic human interrelations. There's nothing more basic than the fact that each and every one of us is the child of a parent, right? Whether we ourselves become or whatever, that, but each of us is the child of a parent by definition. So that's life. So there's nothing more human, more universal, and more profoundly important than dealing with how we relate to our parents. And the rabbi said, you can find it everywhere, and we can learn from anyone. It's not just Torah study that's gonna guide us in this.
I don't know the background here, but one can honor one's parents in the way that the Talmud means from afar. You don't.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. There's every story in the Naked City is different. Every circumstance has its own nuances, and it's definitely possible to do the right thing in all kinds of ways. There's no, again, one prescription fits all, but there's a certain sense of there's a right way to do things and then there's a wrong way to do things. You just have to be cognizant of that idea and struggle with it yourself, right? And do the best that you can. Do the best that you can. Okay, I just want to point out again that the sages are very, very attuned to the complications of relationships between parents and children, and they put a tremendous onus on the parents. Parents, if you want your children to treat you with respect, then you better treat them in a way that will make it possible for them to treat you with respect. If you make it hard for them to relate to you because of whatever other mishigasim are going on, then when they fail in treating you with respect, some of that's going to go on you. You have to raise them from the beginning in a way that will foster their ability to treat you with respect, because you come first, literally, temporally. I don't mean values wise. I mean you're there in the world before they are, so you got to set it up right for them to be able to treat you with respect. So all of this is all very important. But now what the Talmud is saying is studying Torah is still the supreme value, even beyond that. Okay, what's the proof?
The Gemara now offers a proof. For the master said.
Now we're on 17a1.
Why were the years of Ishmael counted in the Torah? In order to calculate through them the years of Jacob. That's the answer. For it is written, these were the years of Ishmael's life, 137 years.
Okay, so the Gemara has here, an assumption that Ishmael, who cares about Ishmael? Who wants to know facts about Ishmael? He's, terrible. We don't like him. He was a bad guy. He was rejected. So that's the given. That's the assumption that the rabbis are working with. And therefore they're surprised. So why does the Torah devote some attention to Ishmael and actually treat him as if he were a patriarch, which he was, of his own people, and give us this whole sidebar about Ishmael's life and telling us, how long he lived and who his children were and so on. He's out of the picture. What do we need to know about this? So the answer, pretty inadequate answer, is that's the way that the Torah gives us a measuring stick for figuring out the chronology of Jacob's life. Okay, so, take it with a grain of salt. Jen.
I was just going to say, I don't think he was treated all that well, but he came back and honored his father at his funeral, and I don't know, he's lived in the same area as Isaac or something. Yeah. So it doesn't seem like he carried any grudge against Isaac. So it seems like that's a really unfair way for our sages to look at Ishmael.
Right. We've talked about this a lot of times, but I think it's important what you bring up, both with regard to Ishmael and of course, with regard to Esav, Jacob's brother. It's more actually in Esav's case than in Ishmael's case. In Ishmael's case, it's not really all that clear how Ishmael related to his father. But in Esav's case, it's clear that Esav seems to have been a very, very devoted son. So there's an irony here that actually, if you want to look at paradigms of dedicated children, these bad guys actually measure up pretty well. Ishmael comes back. The Torah does tell us Ishmael comes back with Isaac together. They bury their father. So there is some kind of peacemaking that has happened. And we've talked about that other times. There's, other midrashim and other sources that indicate that there was some kind of reconciliation and patching up of things. But again, the rabbis are not really interested in being perfect readers of the Torah back there. They're anachronistic and they're proud to be anachronistic. What they are reading the Torah is to make sense of the Torah in their own times. In their own times, Ishmael is not a friend. Esav is not a friend. So when they retroject that kind of reality back into the Torah, they know what they're doing. They are speaking about the difficult situation that they're in presently, and then putting it back in there. What's the story with Ishmael? Okay, so look at note 1 and then note 2. That is, why should the
Torah record the number of years that a wicked man lived? That Rashi. Although Ishmael repented at the end of his life, see Baba Basra, the Torah generally mentions the years of only those who were righteous throughout their lifetimes.
Okay, so this is, just take these propositions, these axioms for the present moment as it is. Go ahead. Number 2.
By ascertaining how long Ishmael lived, we can derive that Jacob studied at the Academy of Heifer between his departure from Isaac's house and his arrival at Laban's house for 14 years.
Okay, right. So now everybody has to get a pencil and a piece of paper, because here's what we're going to start following through on. Now, the Gemara now begins.
Then the Gemara now begins the calculation to prove that Jacob studied in the Academy of Heifer for 14 years. How much older was Ishmael than Isaac? 14 years, as can be proven from the following 2 verses. For it is written, and Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. And it is also written, Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Thus, at the time of Isaac's birth, Ishmael was 14 years old.
Okay, so that's number one, step number one. Good.
Continue?
Yeah.
Yeah. Having proven that Ishmael was 14 years older than Isaac, the Gemara continues, and it is written at the birth of Jacob and Esau, Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. According to this, how old was Ishmael when Jacob was born? 74. And at that time, how many years remained of Ishmael's life? 63. It follows that when Ishmael died, Jacob was 63 years old.
Okay, got that? Is anybody checking on this?
Yeah.
Okay, no. Good.
The Gemara cites a Baraita to prove that Jacob was 63 years old at the time he received the blessing from his father Isaac, which corresponded to the year Ishmael died. And it was taught in a Baraita, our forefather Jacob was 63 years old at the time he was blessed by his father. And at that period of time, Ishmael died. As it is written, when Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob, etc., so Esau went to Ishmael and took Machalas, the daughter of Ishmael, sister of
Nevayot.
Nevarot. What?
Nevayot.
Nevayot. The Beresa, analyzing this verse, asks, from the implication of the Torah saying that Machlas was the daughter of Ishmael, do I not therefore know that she was the sister of Nevarot?
Nevayot.
Nevayot.
Right, of course, everybody knows everybody's family tree and so on. Go ahead.
Why then does the Torah identify Machalas by her relationship to Nevayot? The Baraita answers, this teaches that Ishmael betrothed her to Esau and died before the marriage took place. Then Nevayot, her brother, gave her over in marriage to Esau. Thus, scripture mentions Nevayot at the time of the marriage.
Okay, so that's how we can locate that Ishmael has passed away, because he's not there to give away his daughter, and the elder brother has to be the one who hands over the daughter to Esau to marry. Okay, so now we know that that's when Ishmael died. And now let's go back, once we've established that, keep going shortly.
This all makes it very clear, by the way, about how we calculate, how we know.
I'm glad.
Yeah. Shortly after receiving the blessing from his father, Jacob was forced to flee to his uncle Lavan's house in Aram Naharaim. We have established that Jacob was 63 years old when he left his father, and that he dwelt at Lavan's house for 14 years until Joseph was born. This means that he should have been 77 years old at the time of Joseph's birth. And it is written, and Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh. This means that Jacob should have been 107 years old when Joseph first stood before Pharaoh. Add to this the 7 years of plenty.
Remember the 7 years of plenty from Pharaoh's dream, right?
And the 2 years of famine, after which Jacob arrived in Egypt. This should place Jacob's age at 116 when he arrived.
Got it?
Yeah.
Good.
However, this is not so, but it is written in the narrative of Jacob's meeting with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many years have you lived? Jacob answered Pharaoh, the years of my sojourns have been 130 years.
Right, it should have been 116, but he says that he's actually 130. What's the difference between 130 and 116? 14.
14, yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
But according to the previous calculation, Jacob should have been 116 at the time. Therefore, 14 years are missing from the calculation. The Gemara concludes, rather learn from this that the 14 years that he was studying in the Academy of Heifer, between his departure from Isaac's house and his arrival at Lavan's house, were not counted in the calculation.
QED. Well done, rabbis. So this is, so this proves that there are 14 unaccounted years according to the chronology. So what are we going to do with those uncounted 14 years? The answer is, of course, obviously it means that for 14 years he was studying Torah in a yeshiva. It's indisputable, right? It reminds me, there used to be a joke in yeshiva that, we're wearing a yarmulke, wearing a kippah. How do you know you're supposed to wear a kippah? Does the Torah ever actually say that you're supposed to wear a kippah, that you're supposed to cover your head? So the answer is, of course, we learn it from Jacob, because it says, Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva vayelech Harana, that Jacob left Beersheva and he went to Haran. So do you think that he actually walked even 6 feet without covering his head? Of course not. So there you have it, QED. Obviously, you have to wear a head covering, and Jacob is the proof. Okay, so
he wore the head covering just to keep the sun off of his head, or the?
No, he wore the head covering because we are using circular logic. He wore the head covering because we're assuming that it's impossible not to wear a head covering. So of course he wore a head covering, right? And that proves that he wore a head covering, right? Okay. So that's why it was a joke. Okay. Yeah, we recognize. So this is a little bit, of the same thing. We've got gaps here in the assumptions that we've made to get the numbers to work, and the simplest way to fill this gap is to posit that he spent 14 years studying at Shem and Heifer. There is. I wanted to. Okay, no, we're not going to see this here. We'll see it maybe a little bit later. Okay, go ahead. We're going to get to it in the next note. Okay, so now we're on 17A2. We're really getting very close to the end of this chapter in the Talmud.
Wait, did we turn the page already?
We did.
Oh, there we are. Yeah. It could also be that at that age, 116 or 130, he just didn't have the memory anymore. That's pretty old, and people forget things.
Okay, that's not the assumption that's being made here. Go ahead.
I'm just offering another explanation. The Gemara proves its deduction is correct by citing a Baraita. For it is taught in a Baraita, Jacob was hidden away in the Academy of Heifer for 14 years. Heifer died 2 years after Jacob, our forefather, and had gone down to Aram.
2 years after Jacob had gone down.
Had gone down to Aram Nev Harayim. For Jacob had left there and arrived in Aram Neharayim. We thus find that when Jacob stood at the well upon his arrival in Aram Neharayim, he was 77 years old.
Right, he was 63 when he ran away from his father because Esav wanted to get him. Add 14 years is 77.
He was 77, yeah. It is thus obvious that 14 years elapsed between his departure from his father's house at the age of 63 and his arrival at Lavan's house. These years were spent at the Academy of Heifer.
Okay. So we now have established everybody's satisfaction. Anybody dissatisfied? Raise your hand now, or we just keep on going. Everybody's satisfaction that he studied Torah for 14 years. And that was his hiding place. That was his safe haven. Esau couldn't touch him there, right? This is also a kind of implicit part of the story, that Esau, no matter how much he wanted to get him, he would never go into the yeshiva and take him out of there. So this is like an early example of sanctuary, of seeing that sacred place as off limits to anybody who would want to do harm to somebody else. Okay, Having shown
that Jacob spent 14 years in the Academy of Heifer studying Torah, the Gemara asks, and how do we know that Jacob was not punished for neglecting to honor his father and mother during those years he spent studying Torah?
That's the whole point of our argument here, right? That studying Torah is so important that if it causes you to neglect taking care of your parents, it's not considered a sin. You didn't do something bad by neglecting taking care of your parents, as long as they're occupied with Torah study. So here we now prove, number one, that Jacob was engaged in Torah study. He ran away from his parents. So how come that's not counted as a black mark against him, that he's not taking care of his parents for 14 years? The answer is, how do we know that he's not? Go ahead. Gemara answers.
Gemara answers, for it was taught in a Baraita, it is found that Joseph was separated from his father after his brothers sold him, 22 years, just as Jacob, our father, was separated from his father. However, according to the calculation of the Gemara, Jacob was separated from his father for 36 years. If so, why was Joseph separated from Jacob for only 22 years? Rather, we must conclude that the 14 years Jacob spent in the Academy of Heifer studying Torah were not included in the calculation of the years for which he deserved punishment for neglecting to honor his father and mother.
Okay, so now let's go backwards a little bit. And what the rabbis now say is, if you really look at what happens in the Torah, there is this poetic justice that is played out in the stories from one generation to the other. Because let's also remember, here we're talking about whether Jacob was punished for not taking care of the parents that he ran away from. Well, guess what? He also suffered that his child disappeared from him and didn't take care of him, right? Joseph, the next generation, was obviously by the brothers, forcibly removed, but he was the apple of Jacob's eye. So clearly when Jacob, and the Torah tells us this explicitly, when Joseph disappears from Jacob's life, Jacob is in terrible, terrible anguish. So let's imagine Isaac and Rebekah, that Jacob disappears from their life. Aren't they in terrible anguish? So there's a back and forth, there's a mirroring of these two situations. And then what we end up coming up with is actually it ends up being the same amount of time. The same amount of time, 22 years. So there are 22 years that Joseph is out of the picture for Jacob, and we can figure that out with again following all of the stories that are there until finally Joseph reveals himself to his brothers and then gets his father to come down, and his father goes, "Oh my God, I never thought I would see Joseph alive again," and we have that whole family reunion. So you can count it up; it's 22 years. So now the Talmud says that 22 years is the quid pro quo for 22 years that Jacob neglected his parents. But if you look at the whole thing, it ends up that he wasn't with his parents for 36 years, not 22 years. The answer therefore is 14 of those years are not his fault. 14 of those years, he had to be in the Academy of Heifer. That doesn't count against him. But there are 22 years that really do count. Now remember, when we study those Torah portions again and again and again, we sometimes ask that question: why isn't there any communication between the child and the parents? We usually ask it with Joseph, but we could just as well ask it for Jacob. When Jacob runs away and he's then finds protection at Laban's house, there's no back and forth there. There's no indications of any communication between him and his parents. And in fact, we never actually get another scene where he reunites with his parents. So, what's going on? A postcard? You couldn't send a postcard? What's the deal? Okay, let's just finish off. I know some people, okay, Sylvia, yeah.
I just have I missed something? Okay, I'll take all this mathematical juggling for granted, but where did the assumption of the academy come from?
So yeah, you missed it a little bit right at the beginning. This is the rabbis' reconstruction of the past in their own image. They are convinced that what they are doing is just a continuation of the small stream of people throughout history who have been loyal to God. So Abraham kept the whole Torah. Abraham kept Passover, because if we keep Passover, then that must be something that's been, if it's right now, it's always been right. If it's a good thing to do now, it's always been a mitzvah to do that. So they throw back Jewish living as they knew it and as they were building it, they throw it back in time into the past. And they convey that everybody that was a good person, Noah and Shem, who was his son, and Abraham, and so on, all of these people are pictured in the contemporary dress and practice of their time. So they understand that they were, just like we have academies of studying Torah, the rabbi said, there must have always been academies of studying Torah.
So this is a construct for that missing gap.
Exactly. Well, not just that, it's a construct, the way that they picture.
The gap, I should say.
This is an example of a much bigger picture that they have of the way the past was, the way they feel themselves as really just a continuity. Then we're not a break, we're not a new development, we are a continuity. So this stuff has always been going on, except most people ignored it, and we are not ignoring it.
And where do we have any references to this academy?
Nowhere, only in the rabbi's legends.
Okay.
Okay?
That was the piece that I was looking for.
Right, that's the acknowledged thing. This is all oral Torah. It's not anywhere written anywhere in the written Torah. Okay, let's finish up this last paragraph and then see what we can wrap up here. Go ahead.
Okay, the Gemara questions why Jacob's punishment lasted 22 years. At any rate, the time of sojourn in Laban's house, away from his parents, was only 20 years. Well, you discussed that. Why then was he punished for 22 years? The Gemara answers, rather, it must have been because he delayed another 2 years on the way back to his father. As it was taught in a Baraita, Jacob departed from Aram Naharaim. I'm sorry, Naharaim. And he came to Sukkot, do I have to say Sukkot, and stayed there 18 months. As it is stated, Jacob sojourned to Sukkot and built himself a house, and for his livestock he made shelters. And in Bethel, he stayed 6 months and brought sacrifices. After this 2-year period, 18 months in Sukkot and 6 months in Bethel, Jacob finally reached his father. He was thus punished for the 22 years spent with Laban and journeying home.
Okay, so, and that's the end of our chapter. So this is, again, on the one hand, it's this fantastical stuff. This is a lot of legends. It's all made up fairy tales. Underneath it, though, there is a certain kernel of insight that I would suggest is here. The rabbis are a little bit attuned to the ambivalence that Jacob himself is feeling about what does it mean to come back home? What does it mean to resume, back the old ways and come back to the family estate? So this is a classic kind of story all over the place, right? What does it mean when the return of the so-and-so child, right? Any returning is going to be fraught with all kinds of emotional, baggage. And they're imagining Jacob himself is not rushing home. That Jacob he's not comfortable running back home as soon as he can. So I missed all of that stuff. The alphabet comes, yes, correct. So that's what he's then culpable for, right? Whatever your own disquiet or discomfort, you still have a supreme obligation to put yourself in the space where you can help your parents. And he doesn't do that. and it may be understandable, and it may be, human in every kind of way. Nevertheless, they're putting this into a kind of a mythic construct of how absolute your obligation is, and you will be held to account for the time that you could have been there for your parents and you weren't. So this is a pretty grim, challenging idea. And it's all being couched in, like I said, in this very, rickety, legend that they've created about Jacob. But the underlying point is a very strong challenge to all of us. And the sages knew that. Like I said before, when they talk about honoring your parents, treating your parents properly, they acknowledge that this is one of the hardest mitzvahs in the Torah, because it is so accompanied by the intangibles of what happens between the two generations. So the way out here, what's your lifeline, so to speak? Studying Torah, right? If you are spending 14 years immersed in studying Torah in a yeshiva, then it's excusable. Then the parents are going to say it's okay. That's all I wanted for my child, is to be a great Torah scholar. This is what's making me feel good. So even though I miss them, and even though they're not there for me in my old age, and so on and so forth, they're doing something that's so important, it's fine with me. That's the kind of overall picture that they are creating. And of course, not everybody can spend 14 years in a yeshiva. Well, if you can't, then you better take care of your parents nicely. So that's basically, one of the things that they're saying here. I just also want to point out, this is a pretty crazy, we read it pretty fast. It's a pretty crazy, bunch of calculations and so on. I think it's pretty safe to say that none of us, certainly speaking for myself, none of us would have engaged in this kind of looking into things and starting to compare this one person's life and that person's life. Every once in a while, something cool comes out, and I like it when I find somebody else put the work into it. But it's certainly not something that I would do. And I think, again, most of us wouldn't do it. But it speaks to a kind of obsessive attention to every kind of detail that the Torah text gives us. We're talking about how much is not in the Torah. No, this Academy of Shomrei is not in the Torah. So the rabbis are creating all kinds of stuff that's not in the Torah, but part of it is also that they are actually looking at every single jot and tittle in the Torah. They really pay attention to all of these different kinds of things that we just sort of like glide right over. So there's a tremendous, you don't do it unless you really are obsessed with it, unless you really, really, really cared so crazily about what's going on there, that you want to figure it all out. So there's a whole genre, there's a whole literature. The Talmud has it here and there in different places, but there are also works that are old works that try to figure out all of the chronologies of everything. What day did Abraham build this altar? What year was it then when Rivka cooked up the soup? All these kinds of things. I have a little bit of that in my own. Okay, Jen, take care. In my library, there are these chronology books that are written, that have been compiled over the rabbinic period, the last 1,500 years or so, that work on these kinds of minute comparisons of this one with this, and this has to be this, to the point where, after all, what year is this in the Hebrew calendar? The year that we have is 5782. How do we know that? I mean, or why do we use that number? Who says we know that? I mean, what does it mean? What does it mean to say 5782? Do we really believe that the world was created 5,782 years ago? Of course not. So where did we get this number from? The answer is it's a result of this kind of project, right? By going through all of these different kinds of calculations of how many years did it take for this and how many years did it take for this, and then you go back a little bit more, and then you go back a little bit more, and then you go back a little bit more, and then you go back a little bit more. By medieval times, the number that we came to, when we get to finally to our time, makes it a continuous accounting and accountability to be 5,782 years. It's a product of this kind of side hobby that was engaged in by certain people in the rabbinic community. Sylvia, yeah.
As an aside, this is why the Orthodox people, young men usually, who've gone to yeshivas are wonderful in law school and tax class. True. I mean, it's incredible.
Right.
But
this minutia is like kids play for them.
It is. They love it. I mean, this is, it's like the tax code. I was just curious, you were talking about the years. When was a date established? Where did that come from? When was that first? So
I should know, but I don't. It's sometime in the Middle Ages we landed on this, because the truth is that in rabbinic documents, in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, where you have Bar Kochba, contracts, and things like that, this year, this accounting by years from creation is not the common way of keeping track. They used other datings, the date of Talmud, 13 years since Talmud, became king or something like that. They used much more localized dating practices, and it's once we actually end up being dispersed and going out into the exile that we decide to somehow figure out a time keeping of the years that would be this biblically based idea. So I don't know exactly when it comes up first, but it's a product of that kind of change. It's not early, not anywhere early. Okay, so we finished this perek. I'm so pleased that we got there. We still have page 17 a little, to go for a few more pages of the translation and commentary. I'll start putting together the next packet to send out to everybody, but we don't have to do that yet. And I look forward to starting the new chapter next week, okay?
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you. Have a nice week.